So Attack on Titan is one of my favorite anime I have ever watched. It is one of the best in my opinion. However, it's finished. There is no more Attack on Titan coming. It is completely finished. There is no plans to do any kind of spin-offs or sequels or anything like that. Now the creator has said that there is a possibility at some point he could do more, but he has no plans at the moment. And to be honest, I'm fine with that. I don't need any more Attack on Titan. There are hundreds of other shows that have the possibility to be as good as that coming in the future that haven't even been written yet. But I am curious on what an Attack on Titan spinoff or sequel could look like. So today I'm going to give you 5 ideas that I had about what a good spinoff or sequel for Attack on Titan would be. Some of these are a bit out there. Some of these I don't think would be that interesting, but I think they are possibilities on what we could see someday. The first of these is just a straight up sequel. We start right where the epilogue leaves off, where we are 2,000 years later after the events of Attack on Titan. We go 2,000 years later, and we pick up with this young boy's story. I don't think this would be that interesting. I think it would play out similarly to what we already got, but with different characters, with different Titans slightly, even if it is Titans that we get and it's not something else. But I do think the lore here would be interesting because this is pretty much where we stop. We don't learn anything past this point. So to learn what kind of Titans do we get? Do we get 9 Titans? Do we get more? Are they more powerful than they were back then? What is that entail? Is the Titans even a thing, or is this just all a kind of a red herring on an ending? We don't know. So a sequel to this would kind of explore this. Now I think this is the least likely of all of these, and my reasoning why is because this is the perfect ending. It gives you the idea that history will repeat itself if enough time has passed and enough people have forgotten about the events that came before it. I think that's what happened with Attack on Titan. Everyone forgot about what happened with the rumbling, what happened with the Titan Wars, and we get to a point to where no one is really afraid of anything anymore. And with that, the wars start back, and it eventually leads to the destruction. Now, the second idea I have is a post-rumbling story. Now, this would take place between the final scene and the epilogue, and pretty much just tell the ending of Mikasa, Armin, Annie, Reiner, all their stories. Now, I don't think this would necessarily feature Levi, Gabby, or Falco. And my reasoning why with that is because those 3 stayed on the mainland. They helped rebuild that. Levi never returned to Paradis from what we can tell. He just stayed away, and I don't blame him. He had nothing left there. He wanted to stay away. I get that. But we don't really see what happens on the island. We don't get to see Historia meeting everyone else again. We don't get to see what happens with Annie and Armin in the future. We don't get to see if that is John with Mikasa. We don't get to see that. All we get to see is some little shadows of people that kind of resemble stuff, and we know what happens to Mikasa. That's it. I think it would be very interesting to see pretty much what happens with Armin and Annie and maybe Connie. And obviously, Reiner as well. Reiner, I think, would be a really interesting one on how he adapts to a world where he's no longer needed as the armored Titan. So we would get some interesting stuff here. Now, the problem that comes with this type of story is there's no Titans anymore. So, and it's a peaceful time. So you're going to have a story that is kind of more, I don't want to say slice of life, but you're doing something similar to what Frieren does. It's a post main story show to where you're just exploring what these characters go through now that everything's over and trying to find their purpose in the world. This would be really interesting to me, but I don't think it really would fit an Attack on Titan label. People watch Attack on Titan because they know you're going to get big Titan fights, you're going to get everything like that, you're going to get some real deep lore, just some really deep, meaningful conversations as well, which I think that's all we would get with this one. We'd get some really deep conversations. We wouldn't get really a whole bunch of lore because we know where this goes. We wouldn't really get any kind of fighting because no one does fight other than maybe a minor skirmish, but I don't think we'd get a whole lot. Now this one I think would be more interesting than a sequel, but I think it has less possibility of ever being made. I don't feel like we're ever going to see really what happens with this. I feel like it kind of explained that because Armin's voice actors are the same as the narrator, then you can go ahead and assume that Armin goes to the island, he tells his story, tells the entire story of Attack on Titan, then we get pretty much just they live peaceful lives. You could throw conflict here, but do you really want to? So while I think this would be really interesting and I would probably really enjoy it, I don't think it's something that really could or should be made. So these last three are ones that I think really could be made and could be some really interesting stories if they ever told them. And the first of these is one that I think actually could happen because we've already gotten a little bit of it, and that is Levi's childhood. So with the release of the Fly art book for Attack on Titan, we did get a small glimpse into what Levi's childhood looked like. After his mother's death and after he begins to be raised by Kenny, we get to see him go through some trauma, get to see him kind of awaken his Ackerman abilities and everything. We get to see all this. I think bridging the gap between that and No Regrets could be interesting to see kind of how he goes through that, and I think it could be a really interesting storyline. I think not really, I'm not going to mention it a whole lot here, and it's not one of the ones I have written down, but I think also you could really, with a story like this, you could also cut to talking about Hanji. Think like Better Call Saul, to where it's a prequel series about a bunch of characters that eventually will connect and will become major partners and major friends and enemies. But at the time, they're not. But they tell their story simultaneously. I think you could do something really interesting with this where it's not only Levi's story you're telling, but Hanji and maybe some Erwin stuff in there. I think you could really do something interesting with this type of storyline. Now, like I said, whether they do this or not kind of just depends on whether he wants to return to this world or not. I could see him deciding not to and just making something brand new. I could see him deciding I don't want to do any kind of thing, so I'm not going to do it at all. But I could also see him deciding, yeah, I want to make maybe 10 volumes of this. And then you get a 2-season anime about it if you wanted to. Now, these final two, I think, are the most interesting in my opinion. I would be the most hyped if either one of these two got made. And the first of them is a Before the Fall adaptation. I don't think this will happen. I think this is actually probably, if I had to be honest, I think it's the least likely of all of them. This is a really interesting series, but it is not written by Ishiyama. So you are pretty much a completely different author, a completely different style. Now, there is nothing in this, or nothing major, that is contradicting the main series. So it could be made. And I think if, with now the series done, you could make some changes to this to be very much in line and do some interesting stuff, maybe even with the main cast, or maybe not the main cast, but some of the side characters. You could do stuff with that, and you could have a really interesting story. I just don't think it'll happen because they don't really sell this anymore. This is quite hard to find. You really only find a few volumes of it. They really aren't restocking these as much as they are the main series, which obviously they're not going to, because the main series will always sell better. But No Regrets and Lost Girls and like the encyclopedia, even Junior High gets printed more than this. So I just don't see it. This would be really interesting in my opinion, but with 17 volumes, it'd probably have to be at least 2 full-length seasons to complete the story. Maybe you could do it in like 3 12-episode seasons. I don't know. But I just don't see them making any kind of anime spin-off about this, even though I think it would be really interesting. And if you haven't read this, this is Attack on Titan lore you can go check out if you're interested. But the final idea that I think would be the, by far, most interesting story they could tell is the Great Titan War. So if you're unaware of how the timeline for Attack on Titan works, about 2,000 years before the events of the main series, we get Ymir acquiring the Titan abilities. She dies, and then the Titan curse pretty much spreads throughout. Well, it gets the 9, and then it just continues going throughout generations. But about 100 years before the events of the main series, we get the Great Titan War, which sees a lot of the Eldian population being forced onto the island, the walls being constructed, and the vow being sent out that if anyone attacks the island, that it will unleash the colossal titans and it will trample the earth. This is where all that comes from. And I think this could be really, really interesting. Not only could we see these moments and see what really happened and whether history is actually true or if some of them things were being blurred, we get to see them. Now, one of the biggest pluses on this idea is this is pretty much the only idea besides a sequel that we could see the Titan shifters in action. But with the Great Titan War, you could really explore what's the Colossal Titan like now? What's the Armored Titan? What's the Female Titan look like? What's the Attack Titan look like? And you could see how all of these become what they are. And what I think would be the most interesting is we would really get to see the Warhammer Titan in action. The Warhammer Titan plays a massive role in the Great Titan War. So to be able to see that on screen or in book, however we would get it, to see that, to see all of these fights that would probably be like legendary. And you don't have to say this character was in it for 13 years. No, they could be in it for 1 year, get captured, they could get it back. We could have a whole interesting storyline in this war and then perfectly line up with the path we need to be on to be able to match up to the series. Now, I think this is probably, once again, a very unlikely story. And my reasoning why is because I just don't think this is something any studio wants to tackle right now. Attack on Titan was a major undertaking, and to tell them, hey, we're going to have you do Titan Wars, and you're going to have to animate all 9 Titans fighting one another, and massive battles, because that is what a Great Titan War should be. You're really talking about a major commitment to a series that could be 2-3 seasons, and we don't know if it would be as popular as the original Attack on Titan. It probably wouldn't be. So would any studio even want to attempt this? But I think all of these could be really interesting series or books or whatever format they took. I think they could be really interesting if done right. Like I said, I don't need any of these to exist. I have been quenched on what I need for Attack on Titan. Would I love to see more? Absolutely. Am I fine if they don't? Yes. So anyway, guys, that will about do it for today's video. Kind of a different video talking about kind of what I would like to see out of a series. I have a few different ideas for this as well, so stay tuned, subscribe, and like this video if you enjoyed this one, and I'll make some more of these. But until then, I will see you guys next time. Bye.